Overall, in terms of just getting started with testing, it's actually very easy. But when it comes to managing a lot of tests, you might need some kind of advanced thinking or maybe shift gears a little bit. A couple of mindset shift or maybe some of the common phrases to keep in mind would be brownfield versus greenfield. Brownfield is if you have an existing code base that might be maybe a legacy system or maybe even a code base that didn't have a lot of tests. So this might be somewhat a bit more difficult versus if you are starting from scratch, greenfield. So you can then implement a lot of the best practices just from the get-go. Testable code is another thing to keep in mind. How easy is it for you to write tests against the code base? A test suite, this is just pretty much everything to do with the test. That would be the integration, the unit tests, as well as the dummy data, and then treating your test as a first-class citizen, meaning just in the same way that you want to maintain your code and make it more efficient or refactor it or cut out items that you're not frequently using. The same thing needs to apply. The same kind of mindset needs to apply to your test suite. And then the idea of a brittle test, sometimes or most of the times you're expected to make changes to your production code. Any change that you make that breaks a lot of the test cases, that's typically referred to as being a brittle test. So the main concept here is having code that's testable. This can only be achieved if you've written your code in a best practices way. For example, using solid principles. Most important principle to take away from solid might be single responsibility as an example. So you have a method that only does one thing, or a method that is small. You've intentionally made it small so that it, not for the sake of testing, but it's very clear as to what this method is doing. So it's got a very clear specification and a very clear outcome. Another thing that makes code a little bit more testable would be clean architecture. Clean architecture typically separates out your dependencies or your external API calls or calls to the database. It separates them out from your core logic or your core domain.